So if you enjoyed this video and want to see more content like this on the channel, you can show your appreciation by clicking on the PayPal link in the description box. And you can donate any amount that you feel is equivalent to the value of this video. Also, leave us a thumbs up. It helps us get more views.
As we were going to break, Lee Stranahan gave us bombshell information about a serial bomber who came to the United States and with others within the DNC and with the Ukraine, was talking about subverting the election and subverting the Electoral College. So I'm going to get back to Lee and give him the floor so that he can break this down for us right now. Lee, go ahead. Continue.
Sure. So let's just go over the cast of characters again here because it's significant. There's a DNC operative named Alexandra Chalupa. She was involved with the Ukraine, right? And by the way, you can look this up in a WikiLeaks email. Ali Chalupa, she sent an email to the DNC. It's completely proven. Ali Chalupa worked in the Clinton administration. Second person you need to know about is Brett Kimberlin. Brett Kimberlin's a convicted serial bomber. In the 80s, he set off a series of bombs around Indianapolis, Indiana. He spent 17 years in prison. You may remember there was a story many years ago where Dan Quayle was accused of, someone said, I was Dan Quayle's pot dealer. That was Brett Kimberlin. He lied. He lied. This is a guy who was convicted of perjury by the time he was like 19 years old. Right, but he gets out of prison, becomes a liberal activist. That's what Brett Kimberlin does. Okay? Now, he was the money guy here. In other words, this foreign national was contacted after the election by someone with the Democrat Party. Then they were put in touch with Alexandra Chalupa. Then they said, we want to bring you over to Washington. The money came from Brett Kimberlin.
And we were just showing, for the people who are listening on radio, we're just showing a clip here laying out the crimes of Brett Kimberlin and the bombings that he was convicted of. Go ahead, Lee.
So this is a video I did a few years ago to explain. Again, it's a complex story, but it's stunning. Now, Brett Kimberlin appears to be the bag man for this operation. In other words, the DNC is not going to write a check. Does that make sense?
Right, right.
They kept one level of separation by using Alexandra Chalupa, who by this time was no longer officially working for the DNC. She introduced this foreign national to Brett Kimberlin, and Brett Kimberlin paid for the trip over. Where did Brett Kimberlin get the money? Well, that's what an investigation is going to need to find out, right? They're not going to say. But this is significant. Now, they brought the foreign national over. Well, how does this tie into the Democrats? Maybe Kimberlin was acting on his own. Maybe Chalupa was acting on her own. No, because this foreign national was brought over to talk to people on Capitol Hill, and he did. Now, here's the thing, David. I'm just asking. You're a well-connected journalist. If you wanted to get someone from a foreign country to come over to talk to people on Capitol Hill, could you set up meetings? Because I couldn't.
That's right.
You see what I'm saying?
That's right. Absolutely. I mean, and that's very suspicious, the fact that this guy who's got a long criminal record would pay to bring over a foreign national who then he shops around to the highest levels of people on Capitol Hill in Washington.
Now, then months later, this foreign national was involved again with Alexandra Chalupa and Brett Kimberlin in a scheme to take down Donald Trump with documents that turned out to be false. And at that point, and this has been reported by BuzzFeed, no right-wing source. BuzzFeed reported on this, and then it was followed up on by the great Chuck Ross at Daily Caller. Brett Kimberlin, again, paid 3 times for this foreign national, Jonathan Schwartz, who used to be with the ANC, by the way, in South Africa. So factor that in.
Heavily communist,
Right. No, he was. He was the militant wing of the ANC.
Yes.
Brett Kimberlin paid 3 times for him to fly from Israel to Rome to look at these documents. They got these documents. They paid $9,000 to get these documents. And the documents turned out to be false.
Get back to Lee. He's breaking down this amazing bombshell story about a guy who has a long criminal record, Brett Kimberlin. He's served time in prison for bombings. He's been involved as a political operative, and he just happened to give money to a foreign national, bring them to the United States, shop them around the highest levels of Washington, D.C., and as Lee was pointing out, this is all involved, and he's going to break it down on his website as well. And, of course, you can find him at citizenjournalismschool.com. And also the website, I guess the article, Lee, will be at thepopulist.us. Will that be where the article is, or is it thepopulist.tv?
Populist.tv is the URL I'm using now. It's
.tv.
Short. It's the same. It all goes to the same place.
Okay.
But, I mentioned right before the break Soros. Let's give some names people know, because I want people to understand why this is happening, okay?
Yes.
So I'm going to name two countries, Syria and Ukraine, that the U.S. has been involved in. Now, the media has hidden what's happened in Syria and the Ukraine. In Syria, regular viewers of InfoWars know that we were basically backing the wrong side. We were funding the rebels who were the Islamists who've been killing Christians and other Muslims, by the way.
That's right.
In Syria, right?
Al-Qaeda's Air Force. Yep, Al-Qaeda's Air Force.
Now, in Ukraine, we backed the overthrow of Yanukovych, okay? And by the way, we then installed, people can go to, you remember Victoria Nuland, the State Department official who was caught on a phone call picking the new government of Ukraine?
That's right.
Handpicking it?
That's right.
You can find that on YouTube. Just look for Victoria Nuland Ukraine phone call.
That's right. It was leaked out. You can listen to it, or you can watch it. You can read the transcript. It's absolutely amazing.
Now, the reason I mention this is let's talk about who was on the side. No, the other side is Russia. In other words, if you demonize Russia, you can bury the truth about Syria and the truth about Ukraine. Mm-hmm. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Now, who was behind the burying of that? Hillary Clinton, who's the Secretary of State under Barack Obama, who pushed for the overthrow of the Syrian government and who was behind it didn't happen on her watch, but she was deeply involved in the Ukraine. Hillary Clinton.
Yes.
John McCain, who spoke in the Ukraine and has been one of the most vocal advocates for the rebels. We know that the CIA was involved in the Ukraine and Syria. We know that they were training people, right?
Yes.
I'm just keeping this simple. And we know that George Soros was also heavily involved. First off, he's one of Hillary Clinton's top donors, but he also spent $100 million in the Ukraine and helped push for things like the Arab Spring. You with me so far?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And we just had Donald Trump shut down the CIA's weapons program to these so-called moderate rebels that we know are really Al-Qaeda or ISIS. And that's why the CIA, I think, is stepping up their rhetoric, saying, hey, we need to basically take down Donald Trump. I mean, openly calling for a coup now in terms of what they're saying to CNN's Wolf Blitzer. Go ahead.
Now, what we also know is that the media did not inform the public about what was actually happening in Syria. I went to Lebanon myself in 2013 and got the truth. Mm-hmm. Ukraine, they didn't tell people. It's like, oh, Russia's annexed this place and it's horrible, right? Now, I want you to notice who's behind the Trump-Russia narrative. Hillary Clinton, John McCain, the CIA. How many CIA leaks have we seen to the Washington Post? The Washington Post has got owned by Jeff Bezos from Amazon. Amazon's got a $600 million contract with the CIA. Anybody can look that up, right?
That's right.
John McCain, Hillary Clinton, the CIA, and the media, and it's all funded by George Soros.
Yeah, isn't it interesting that the $600 million contract, let's focus on that $600 million contract there with Jeff Bezos and Amazon. They're providing data services for the CIA. And then his newspaper just happens to get this anonymous information and leaks and so forth, and then run that through. And we heard earlier John Boehner saying, hey, you don't pick a fight with people like the Washington Post, people who buy ink by the barrel. Well, what he is buying is what Bezos bought was leverage in Washington, and he is using that political leverage. His little, he paid $250 million, which is chump change for Jeff Bezos. As I pointed out, it'd be equivalent to somebody who's making $50,000 or so in the U.S., which is about the median family income. It'd be equivalent to you spending $300 to buy the Amazon Post, the Washington Post, so that you could push your narrative in Washington, so you could lobby people and say, hey, I better get what I want for my businesses, for Amazon, for my space businesses, or maybe there's going to be some unfriendly stories that come out of the Washington Post. So that's the kind of leverage that he's got with that. I think it's very important that we see that connection, what he's doing there, and the fact that Donald Trump is also calling him out on that. Go ahead, Lee.
Well, because this Trump-Russia narrative has been pushed from the start. The first story to come out about it is Ellen Nakashima in the Washington Post on June 14th of last year did the first story accusing Russia. Now, by the way, the other group who fits in here is CrowdStrike.
Yes.
CrowdStrike are the only people to examine the DNC servers. Comey never subpoenaed them and never pushed for it. And CrowdStrike, by the way, co-founded by a former FBI person, and CrowdStrike also had a false report about Ukraine that tried to tie this in. By the way, one other thing to note about CrowdStrike, they just went through a round of funding, and that funding was by Google. So what we've seen is these new economy tech giants. Google, Eric Schmidt, is one of Hillary Clinton's biggest supporters. Bezos owns the Washington Post. So we're seeing how the world of new media, what I will call non-independent new media, the clearly partisan pro-Clinton new media, right, has worked with the old media to hide the truth about Syria, about Ukraine, and the way they had to do that, David, think about it. It's Hillary, it's McCain, it's CIA. They had to make Russia the enemy.
Yes. And you've been on CrowdStrike for the longest time, along with Ukraine. We've talked about it at length. And I think it's interesting that a couple of weeks ago, you and I have not talked since it happened, but we had a retraction from the New York Times. I mentioned earlier in the show, New York Times and Reuters retracted it and said, well, yeah, it wasn't all 17 agencies. It was actually DNI Clapper. He met with some hand-picked representatives, we'll say sycophants, if you will, of the NSA, the CIA, and the FBI. The FBI, who had not seen the servers, as you pointed out, because CrowdStrike wouldn't turn them over. So where's all this information coming from? It's just coming from this DNC contractor. He presents it to them. And then he says in testimony in May, he says, well, nobody objected when I told them what CrowdStrike told me. So therefore, I speak for all 17 agencies. And that's where this nonsense came from. But it was a narrative that began with Hillary Clinton back in October in the debate, saying all 17 agencies agree that the Russians have tried to corrupt and hacked our election. And so they're, I think, guilty of the Hatch Act. They need to be investigated by a real attorney general as to their violations in working with Hillary Clinton to try to get her elected. That's a violation of the Hatch Act at the very least.
Well, and I don't want to shock the InfoWars audience, but you'd almost think there's a provable case that establishment Republicans and Democrats in collusion with the media and the deep state are trying to fool the American public. You'd almost, I don't know, like I said, I don't want to freak people out. If you're an InfoWars audience member, you're going... And that's the story.
And also, Lee, you know, you're there. You've been at the White House press conference and press corps and everything. And of course, Jim Acosta, White House press corps representative for CNN, full week after you had the New York Times and Reuters say that no, it wasn't 17 agencies. It was, and they said it was 3 or 4. It wasn't. It was just CrowdStrike and Clapper. But anyway, when Trump talked about that, Jim Acosta took him to task. He says, oh, it was all 7. And that was a week after they'd done their retraction. So even when other parts of the mainstream media will retract and do it quietly, you still have people like CNN pushing that long-term narrative to the public.
The way the American propaganda machine works, when we think of propaganda, we think of North Korea, where they have one state news agency and all the news comes through that, or the Soviet Union, where you had Pravda and TASS and that's it, right? The way the American propaganda machine works is you have 500 channels, but they're all pushing the same narrative.
Yes.
You see what I'm saying?
Yes, yes.
And really,
used to just be 3 channels, now it's 500.
6 companies.
That's right.
But it's very important that people understand it. They do it by 2 means. Repetition. See, don't forget, this is not InfoWars versus CNN. This is not Breitbart versus the Washington Post. This is a handful of sites. InfoWars, Breitbart, Daily Caller, a few others, against everybody else.
That's right. It used to just be... And I think it's interesting, Lee, to say, you know, we used to have like 3 to 5 channels that we could listen to, and they would all say the same thing, Operation Mockingbird. Being able to look that up if you don't know what that is, but you probably do if you're listening to InfoWars. Now we've got 3 to 5 companies, but they've got 500 channels to say the same thing. That's essentially what we're looking at now.
That's right. And they do it two ways, by repetition and omission. Repetition is everybody in that press room, where I've been in the White House press room many times, and everybody's asking a variant of the same question. And David, I've literally heard other reporters congratulate each other and say, hey, good job on picking up my question. And they literally said, this is the way we're going to do this. We need to carry the ball down the field for each other. They see themselves as I literally heard this, David.
Yeah.
They see themselves as a team. But the other way they do it is omission. If you look at the pushback against Sean Hannity's bringing the story up, the Washington Post and CNN never mention once the email where Ali Chalupa is reporting to the DNC. She says, I'll have more for you. And it's forwarded by the DNC's Luis Rivera, who's the director of communications. He forwards it to the Democrats' national press secretary. These are not low-level people, David.
Right.
This is provable. Every single thing is so provable. And this is one of the reasons I'm really big on I don't like conjecture, because this story, which is all provable and admitted, proves exactly what the InfoWars audience and people like you and Alex have been saying for years. There is, in fact, I don't know how else to put it without sounding like an ad, there is a conspiracy to control your mind. That's what's going on here.
That's
and
right.
The way they do it is repetition every single day on these other networks, and then they leave out key facts and key stories. There's no coverage of this Ukrainian thing, nothing.
If you're interested to learn how to create content and spread content, we'll show you how. Go to the Operation How YouTube channel, click on the About button, and then click Message. Send us an email if you want to